The fastest way to learn is not by memorizing, but by playing with ideas until they feel natural. Try to explain them out loud as if you were teaching a child. If you need to memorize, it's because you haven't understood. And if you haven't understood, you haven't learned. This method is a trap. You might be able to repeat words, but you won't truly understand anything. And when an exam, or life itself, demands that you use that knowledge, it simply won't be there. But here's the secret. Whenever you learn something new, don't be satisfied with just storing it in your head. Speak it out loud. Explain it. Teach it. If there's no one around, teach it to yourself. Talk to yourself in your room, in the car, while you walk, even in the shower. Turn thoughts into words. When you can speak clearly and naturally, as if you were explaining it to someone else, that's when the knowledge becomes yours. Listen carefully. There's one infallible sign that someone truly understands an idea: the ability to make it simple. Anyone can hide behind complicated words, but only those who really understand can explain with clarity. Let me put it clearly. If you can't explain it simply, you haven't understood it. Repeating complex terms might impress the uninformed, but it doesn't fool reality. If you can't simplify it, you don't master it. When a concept still feels confusing, tangled with too many loose details, the problem isn't the subject itself. The problem is how you organized it in your mind. But when you can take that same concept and translate it into direct, logical, and accessible words, then you've reached true understanding. And here's the central point. Simplicity doesn't weaken knowledge, it strengthens it. The simpler it is, the more essential. The more essential, the more unforgettable. Information stops being a burden you carry and becomes a tool you can use any time. That's why the greatest scientists, philosophers, and geniuses always sought clarity. They knew the mind doesn't need to drown in complexity. The mind needs to see the structure. When you learn to do this, you don't just understand better, you never forget. That is the path of real learning, not accumulating words, but distilling until only what matters remains. Every time you explain something, you strengthen your mind. It's like a muscle that doesn't grow at rest, but under challenge. Explaining is that challenge. It forces the brain to organize, review, connect, and test what it has learned. Think about it. When you only read or listen, you're in a passive position. It's as if information flows through you without taking root. But when you force yourself to teach, even if it's only to yourself, your mind changes gears. You leave the passive mode and enter the active one. You're no longer just receiving, you're producing, creating clarity. And here's the magic. In this process, the brain reveals what you still don't understand. If you get stuck, if you can't explain a detail, that means you've uncovered a gap in your knowledge. And that's wonderful, because now you know exactly where to improve. You're no longer in the dark. At the same time, every time you manage to explain something clearly, something powerful happens. The knowledge sticks. It takes deep root. It stops being a temporary visitor and becomes a permanent part of your mental structure. That's why, once you explain something well, you'll rarely forget it afterward. This cycle, learn, explain, correct, and fix, is what accelerates your growth in any area. The more often you repeat it, the stronger your mind becomes. It's like training every day. With discipline, you reach results that seem impossible to those who never practice. And this is exactly how the greatest thinkers reached the level of genius. They didn't memorize, they didn't pile up dead information. They turned explanation into their training ground. And with every explanation, they became faster, clearer, and deeper. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental. This method shouldn't be used only once in a while. It must become a daily habit. The secret isn't in long study sessions, but in constant repetition, in training your mind during small intervals. You don't need hours of absolute silence or perfect conditions. On the contrary, great learners use any moment. If you're waiting for a bus, explain quietly what you just studied. If you're walking, teach yourself the concept you learned earlier that morning. If you're alone in your room, speak out loud as if you were giving a lesson. These stolen minutes of the day are hidden treasures. Most people waste them getting lost in useless distractions. You, however, can use them as a training ground for your brain. It's in these moments that knowledge solidifies, because you're not just reviewing, you're organizing and simplifying. But understand this, you don't need to be perfect. Many times you'll stumble, forget, get stuck, and that's exactly where the power lies. Those stumbles reveal the gaps you still need to strengthen. With each attempt, you come back sharper, clearer, more confident. When this becomes a habit, something extraordinary happens. You start to think differently. Your mind becomes trained to seek clarity in everything. You begin to organize ideas automatically, to separate the essential from the unnecessary, to communicate better without effort. And all of this is born from simple minutes scattered throughout the day. This is how a sharp mind is built, not through endless hours of forced memorization, but through small, constant rituals of explanation. A little every day, anywhere, always. Now pay very close attention, because this can change the way you deal with procrastination. Whenever you feel stuck, unmotivated to start, use this method as an immediate action trigger. Instead of waiting for the right time to study or work, simply begin by explaining what you need to learn. When you explain out loud, your mind is forced to focus. It can't wander, it can't drift away. You cut through the cycle of procrastination because speaking demands presence. It's impossible to procrastinate while you're producing clarity. And here's a transformative detail. Say out loud phrases that reprogram your mind not to procrastinate. Declare, I act now. I don't postpone. I make it happen. When you hear your own voice, you create a powerful internal command. It's as if your brain is forced to believe it and obey. That's the trick. Don't wait for motivation to act. Create movement, and motivation will follow. As you hear yourself explaining, you generate an immediate sense of progress. You realize you already know something, that you've already advanced. That small step builds confidence, and confidence builds action. Procrastination is born from confusion, from the feeling that something is too big or too difficult. But when you explain, everything breaks down into simple parts. What once seemed like an insurmountable monster suddenly becomes a clear sequence of steps, and in that moment, fear disappears. The great geniuses never waited for inspiration to fall from the sky. They created clarity first, and clarity pulled everything else forward. That's exactly what you must do. Whenever you feel stuck, stop and explain. Teach yourself out loud, even if it's just for 60 seconds. That single minute is enough to break inertia and put you into motion. And once movement begins, procrastination loses its power. You're no longer a hostage to feeling like it because you've already created discipline. Now listen closely, because here's the point that separates the average student from someone who learns in an extraordinary way. The brain truly learns when it recreates. In this process, you discover paths that were never in the book, explanations even the teacher never gave, metaphors that make sense only to you. Knowledge stops being external and becomes something shaped by your own mind. That's why geniuses seem to see the world differently. They don't memorize ready-made formulas. They reinvent, simplify, adapt. They turn every concept into something alive. And when you do this, you learn in a way that is never the same as anyone else, because no one else will ever explain it with the same words you used. Think about it. If you can explain the law of gravity with a falling apple, or explain a math formula using an example from your daily life, it means you've mastered it. You no longer depend on the original way you received the information. You own it. This is how you must learn from now on. Don't copy, recreate. Don't memorize, explain. Don't repeat, transform. That is the mark of great thinkers, and it's what will place you far above average. Now listen with your full attention. If you take this method seriously, if you truly commit to teaching yourself every single day, something extraordinary will happen. You will leap far ahead of most people. While the majority remain stuck in rote memorization, repeating words without understanding, you'll be building real knowledge, solid and unshakable. While others study for hours and forget the next day, you'll learn in minutes and remember forever. While they feel insecure, you'll stand with confidence, clarity, and mastery. That is the power of teaching yourself, the power of simplifying, of recreating, of turning the difficult into the easy. It's what separates those who merely get by from those who become true references. It's what turns an ordinary student into someone brilliant, capable of mastering any subject and applying it in real life. And here's the truth. You don't need to be a genius to learn like a genius. You need discipline, effort, and the courage to practice a method that seems almost too simple to be true. And that's precisely why so few ever use it. But those who do surge ahead. So let me tell you this. Every time you get up and dedicate a few minutes to teaching yourself, you're gaining ground. You're building an advantage that compounds day after day until the world can no longer ignore you. That is the real power of. It's not about storing information in your head. It's about transforming information into clarity, clarity into action, and action into results. Do this, and you will never be the same again. Now I want you to make a pact. Write in the comments, "I choose to learn like a genius." This phrase is your declaration that you will no longer live in the mediocrity of rote memorization, but will transform every study session into clarity, every concept into mastery. And if this lesson resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to keep elevating your learning. And remember, those who teach, learn. Those who simplify, master. Those who practice this every day become unstoppable. What if the reason you can't think clearly has nothing to do with how smart you are? What if overthinking isn't a thinking problem at all? It's a problem of trying to think about thinking while you're already thinking. The brain doesn't work like a library where you can pull out any book at will and examine it carefully. It works more like a stream, and when you try to grab the water to see it better, you disturb the very thing you're trying to observe. Most people believe that more thinking leads to better thinking, that if you just analyze something long enough, turn it over enough times in your mind, you'll finally see it clearly. But there's something peculiar that happens when you do this. The more you think about a problem, the muddier it becomes. Not because the problem is getting harder, but because you're adding layer upon layer of thought on top of the original question. Let's look at what actually happens when someone overthinks. Imagine a student sitting with a mathematics problem. The problem itself might be straightforward. Find the area of a triangle. Simple enough. But watch what happens in the mind. First comes the actual problem. Then comes the thought. Am I doing this right? Then, what if I forget the formula? Then, I always mess these up. Then, why am I so slow at this? Pretty soon, the student isn't working on the mathematics problem anymore. They're working on an entirely different problem, a psychological one, about their own adequacy. And that problem has no solution, because it's not even a real problem. It's just noise. This is what overthinking really is. It's the mind creating secondary problems that have nothing to do with the original question. And here's what makes it particularly troublesome. These secondary problems feel important. They feel like thinking, but they're just interference. Now, the natural question is, how do you stop this? And that's where most people make another mistake.
They try to stop overthinking by thinking about how to stop overthinking. They analyze their overthinking. They worry about their worry. And now they've created a third layer of problems on top of the second layer, which was already on top of the first layer. It's like trying to smooth out wrinkles in a bedsheet by crumpling it up more. So what's the alternative? The first principle is surprisingly simple. Separate the question from the questioning. When you look at any problem, whether it's mathematical, practical, or personal, there's the actual problem, and then there's everything you're adding to it. Most of the mental suffering comes from that second part. The actual problem of, how do I solve this equation, is clean. The added parts, what does it mean if I can't? Why is this so hard for me? What will happen if I fail? Those are the parts that create the tangle. Think about what happens when you read a difficult passage in a book. The passage itself has a certain meaning, but as you read, your mind starts generating commentary. This is confusing. I should understand this. Other people probably get this faster. Maybe I'm not smart enough for this material. Notice that none of this commentary helps you understand the passage. It's just noise. The passage remains exactly as difficult or easy as it was before you added all that commentary. The technique is this. When you notice the commentary starting, you don't fight it. You don't try to stop it. You simply see it for what it is. Commentary, not content. It's like watching credits roll at the end of a film. You don't have to do anything with them. You just let them pass. Here's the second principle. The brain clears itself when you give it something real to do. Overthinking happens in a vacuum. When your mind has nothing concrete to work on, it starts working on itself, and that's when you get these endless loops of thought about thought about thought. But give the brain an actual task, something external and specific, and the loops stop. Picture a person lying awake at night, thinking about a conversation they had earlier. Round and round it goes. Did I say the wrong thing? What did they really mean? How should I have responded? This can go on for hours. But now imagine that same person gets up, takes out a piece of paper, and writes down exactly what was said and exactly what they wish they'd said. Suddenly, the thinking becomes productive. It has a direction. It's not overthinking anymore, it's just thinking. The key is specificity. Vague problems generate vague thinking, which generates more vague thinking endlessly. But concrete problems generate concrete thinking, which leads to concrete solutions or concrete conclusions. Even if the conclusion is, I don't know, that's concrete. You can work with that. The third principle is about time and patience. The brain solves problems at its own pace, not at the pace you demand of it. When you try to force understanding, you create pressure. And under pressure, the mind tightens up. It's like trying to remember someone's name at a party. The harder you try, the more it slips away. But the moment you stop trying and move on to something else, the name appears. This doesn't mean being lazy. It means understanding how insight actually works. You can study a problem intensely for an hour, put it aside, and find that the solution appears later while you're doing something completely unrelated, washing dishes, walking, or just staring out a window. This isn't magic. The brain continues working on problems in the background, beneath conscious awareness. But it can only do this when you're not constantly interrupting it with demands for immediate answers. Many students make this mistake. They study for an exam, and when they can't immediately recall something, they panic. They try harder, which creates more panic, which makes recall even harder. But if they simply move to a different question and come back later, the answer they couldn't remember before is suddenly obvious. Nothing changed except the pressure they were applying. Here's the deeper mechanism at work. The mind has two modes of operation. One is focused and deliberate, useful for applying known methods to clear problems. The other is diffuse and associative, useful for making connections, seeing patterns, and finding new approaches. Overthinking happens when you try to use the focused mode for problems that need the diffuse mode, or vice versa. Think of it like vision. When you look directly at something in dim light, it's hard to see. But if you look slightly to the side, letting your peripheral vision catch it, suddenly it's clear. That's because the center of your eye works differently than the periphery. They're built for different tasks. The mind works the same way. Sometimes the direct approach makes things harder to see. You need to look sideways at them. This explains why solutions often come when you're not trying. When you stop the focused effort, the diffuse mode takes over. It's been working all along, but the focused mode was drowning it out like trying to hear a quiet conversation while shouting. So how do you use this? When you're stuck on something, genuinely stuck, the answer isn't to think harder. It's to think differently. Work on something else. Read about a different subject. Take a walk. Let the problem sit. This feels wrong because we're taught that persistence means constant effort. But real persistence means knowing when to back off and let the deeper processes do their work. Now, let's apply this to some real situations. Suppose you're writing something, an essay, a letter, a report. You write a paragraph, and then you stop. It doesn't sound right, so you rewrite it. Still not right. You rewrite it again. After an hour, you have 6 versions, each slightly different, and you can't tell which is better anymore. This is overthinking in action. What's happening? You've lost the original sense of what you wanted to say. Each rewrite moves a little further from that original intention. And now you're comparing versions without any reference point. The solution isn't to analyze them more carefully. The solution is to step away completely. Go do something else for an hour or a day. When you come back, you'll immediately see which version is clearest, or you'll see that none of them captured what you meant. And you'll write a new version that does. Or consider decision-making. Someone offers you a job, and you need to decide. You make a list of pros and cons. The list is balanced good points on both sides, so you think about it more. You add more items to the list. You weight them differently. You ask friends. You lie awake thinking about it. And the more you think, the less certain you become. This happens because you're trying to reach certainty through analysis alone. But some decisions can't be analyzed into certainty. At some point, you have to recognize that you've gathered the available information, and now you simply need to choose. The overthinking isn't helping you decide. It's just postponing the decision while creating the illusion that you're making progress. Here's a useful technique. Set a specific time limit for deliberation. Give yourself 3 days to think about it. Really think, gather information, consider the angles, but when those 3 days are up, you decide. No more analysis. This forces you to distinguish between productive thinking and wheel spinning. Or take personal worries. Someone says something that bothers you. Maybe a criticism, maybe just an offhand comment. And you replay it in your mind. What did they mean? Were they attacking you? Should you say something back? What would you say? How would they respond? You're running through entire imaginary conversations, entire scenarios that haven't happened and probably never will. The problem isn't that you're thinking about it. The problem is that you're thinking in circles. There's no new information coming in, you're just recombining the same elements over and over. And each recombination feels slightly different, which tricks you into believing you're making progress, but you're not. You're just stirring the pot. The way out is to recognize this for what it is. Rehearsal without performance. You're practicing something that doesn't need practice. The real conversation, if it happens, won't go the way you're imagining anyway. All this mental rehearsal is just burning energy. What helps? Do something physical. Write the thoughts down and be done with them. Or better yet, do something completely unrelated that requires attention. Fix something, build something, read something challenging. The key is to engage the mind with something that has resistance, something that pushes back, that breaks the loop. Here's what all of this comes down to. Clarity doesn't come from more thinking, it comes from better thinking. And better thinking isn't about quantity or intensity. It's about knowing what kind of thinking serves you and what kind just spins in place. The mind is a remarkable instrument, but like any instrument, it can be used well or poorly. A violin in skilled hands produces music. In unskilled hands, it produces noise. The violin hasn't changed, only the way it's being used. Your mind works the same way. Overthinking is just the noise that happens when you're using the instrument incorrectly. The great liberation is realizing you don't need to control every thought. You don't need to solve every uncertainty. You don't need to know everything before you act. Most of the questions that keep you awake at night aren't real questions. They're just the mind running its commentary program because it has nothing better to do. Give it something better to do. Focus on what's concrete. What do you actually need to figure out? What information do you lack? What step comes next? These are real questions with real answers. Everything else, all the what-ifs, the self-doubt, the imaginary conversations, the endless analysis that's just static. And here's the strange thing. When you stop overthinking, you don't think less. You think better. You think more clearly. Ideas come easier. Solutions appear faster. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're getting out of your own way. The brain knows how to solve problems. It's been doing it long before you learn to second-guess it. Trust it to work. Give it real problems to chew on. Let it move at its own pace. And when it starts spinning its wheels, when you catch yourself in that familiar loop of thought about thought, just notice it. Don't fight it. Just see it for what it is, the mind's way of saying it has nothing productive to do right now. Then give it something productive, or give it nothing at all. Both work better than fighting with your own thoughts. If you found something useful here, there's more to explore. But don't explore it by thinking about what you learned. Explore it by using it. Pick one thing, just one, and try it the next time you catch yourself overthinking. That's all. One thing, one time. See what happens. The understanding comes from doing, not from analyzing the doing. And that might be the most important point of all.
There is an invisible structure that determines how far your mind can evolve. Most people spend their entire lives using only the lowest levels of thought. They repeat, they memorize, they imitate, but they don't truly think. They believe that learning means collecting information, but learning, in its purest form, is the transformation of how you think. What you're about to understand isn't a memory trick or a study hack. It's a map of the human mind, the 7 levels of thought that can turn an ordinary student into a true master of reasoning. These levels aren't just steps of knowledge. They are stages of consciousness. Each one represents a different way of interacting with reality, from the simplest, where the brain merely copies what it sees, to the highest, where the mind observes itself and masters its own process of thinking. And when you master these levels, something extraordinary happens. You stop being a slave to information and become the author of understanding. The journey begins at the most basic point, the level of remembrance. And that's exactly where most people get lost, believing that memorizing is the same as learning. Pay close attention now, because this is where almost every student in the world goes astray. The first level of the mind is remembrance, and it's deceptive. It's the level where you confuse effort with progress. The more you repeat, the more you think you've mastered something. But the truth is, the brain here only repeats without understanding. It's like a machine copying words it doesn't comprehend. It records sounds, shapes, and letters, but it doesn't create connections. At this stage, knowledge is shallow, like words written in sand. A gentle breeze, time, stress, or distraction erases everything. That's why people spend hours studying and days later remember nothing, because remembering is not understanding. At this level, the mind works mechanically. It uses flashcards, rereading, repetition, endless summaries. It gets tired, but it doesn't grow. And the more it repeats, the more it believes it's improving. But in reality, it's just reinforcing the same cycle of superficiality. This is where the illusion of learning begins, the comfort of memorization. Because memorizing feels like progress, even when there is none. It's like running on a treadmill. The body moves, but it goes nowhere. True learning begins when you decide to question the very act of remembering. When instead of repeating, you start asking yourself, why is this like that? Where does this idea come from? How do I know that I know? That moment changes everything. It marks the shift from empty memory to living comprehension, from echo to reasoning. So from now on, to complete this level, do this. Explain as you memorize. Don't read passively. Say out loud what you just learned, even if it's still simple. This forces your brain to leave echo mode and enter understanding mode. Use visual association. Every memory needs an anchor. Turn words into images. Connect concepts to places, faces, or sensations. The brain remembers better than it understands, but it understands better than it repeats. Rewrite creatively. Take your notes and rephrase them without looking at the original. This makes your mind reconstruct, not copy. Test your memory under pressure. Close the book, stare at the ceiling, and say out loud what you recall. If you can't, don't blame yourself. That's your brain showing the path toward comprehension. And above all, avoid the comfort of repetition. Repetition feels good because it feels like progress. Question that. Remember, the easier it feels, the less real the progress is. From this point on, as your mind grows tired of repeating, curiosity begins to awaken. And that's what opens the door to the second level, understanding.
Now imagine the noise beginning to turn into sound.
The words you once repeated without meaning finally start to make sense. This is the second level of the mind, understanding. Here you stop being a repeater of information and start becoming an interpreter of knowledge. At the first level, the brain only copies. At the second, it connects. And that simple shift changes everything. It's when something inside you says, now I get it. It's the moment when knowledge stops feeling foreign and begins to feel like a part of who you are. But understanding doesn't happen by accident. It demands that you engage with the idea. You must talk to the content, question it, disagree with it, test it. The mind that truly understands is curious, not obedient. It doesn't accept truths without first breaking them apart and putting them back together. Remember, understanding isn't memorizing more clearly. It's uncovering the meaning hidden behind the word. That's why so many people believe they understand when they've merely rearranged what they memorized. True understanding is when you can explain something to someone else without looking at your notes, and it still sounds natural, fluid, and logical. Understanding is the first step toward freeing the mind. It's when knowledge stops being a weight and starts becoming power. Start translating what you study into your own words. Close the book and say out loud what you understood. Don't use the author's language, use yours. That forces the brain to form original connections. Ask intelligent questions. Ask, why does this happen? What if it were the opposite? How does this connect with what I already know? Questioning is the fuel of comprehension. Teach yourself. Explain the content as if you were teaching a child or a friend. If you get stuck, that's where your understanding still has a gap. Build simple mind maps, not to memorize, but to see relationships. The brain understands better when it sees the structure of ideas.
Avoid rushing.
Understanding requires pause, reflection, and even discomfort. When a subject feels too difficult, that's often the sign that you're close to real comprehension. When you begin to understand, something changes silently. Studying stops feeling like a burden and becomes a dialogue. And that inner dialogue prepares your mind for the next leap, the moment when knowledge becomes action. Now imagine the moment when knowledge stops being an idea on paper and becomes something you can do. This is the third level of the mind, the level of application. Here you discover whether you've truly learned or merely believed you had, because the real test of understanding isn't in repeating what you know, it's in using what you know. This is where theory collides with reality. The mind that applies is the mind that acts. It's not content with grasping ideas. It wants to see what happens when they're tested in the real world. At the second level, you understand, but at the third, you experiment. You step out of passivity and into the territory of error, practice, and iteration. And it's exactly there that learning becomes solid. Think about it. The human brain learns more by doing than by watching. Experience builds neural connections that no book can create. You can read 100 times about swimming, but you'll never truly know the water until you get in it. The same is true of any skill. You can study 1,000 theories, but you only master something when you apply it. And here lies the great secret of those who truly evolve. They don't wait to be ready to start. They learn while doing. They fail fast, correct fast, and learn even faster. Because every act of application is a mirror. It shows you what you truly master and what still needs work. Here's a practical way to strengthen level 3. Turn theory into action. After studying a concept, do something with it. If you learned a formula, apply it to a real problem. If you read about communication, test it in a conversation. If you studied focus, practice 1 uninterrupted hour of deep work. Solve simple problems daily. Apply 1 concept at a time, 1 problem, 1 idea. This practice creates clarity and eliminates the mental chaos of trying to use everything at once. Create mini projects. Learn something new, build something small to prove you understood it. It can be a short text, a piece of code, a simple experiment, or a quick video explanation. The point is to externalize what you learned. Analyze your mistakes immediately. Mistakes are the best teachers. When something doesn't work, don't run, investigate. Ask, Why did this fail? What could I have done differently? Keep the action-reflection cycle. Apply, observe, adjust, repeat. That is the rhythm of real learning. Progress doesn't move in a straight line, but in a spiral. With every turn, you rise a little higher. As the mind starts to apply, it awakens a new kind of power, the power to solve. But there's something deeper, because application is only the beginning of intelligence. The next level is learning to see what others don't, patterns, relationships, the invisible connections between ideas. Now imagine the moment when the world begins to connect. Nothing feels isolated anymore, and each idea starts revealing hidden links to others. This is the fourth level of the mind, analysis, where thinking stops being linear and becomes systemic. Here, you no longer see pieces of information, you see relationships. While most people still try to memorize facts, the analytical mind sees how the pieces fit. It wants to understand causes and consequences, similarities and differences. It observes, compares, and quietly begins to decipher the logic of reality. This is the level where strategic thinking is born, the gaze that separates what is essential from what is noise. Because when you understand how something connects to something else, you begin to understand the whole system, and that changes everything. Information stops being a fragment and becomes structure. Analysis is the turning point between the average student and the true thinker. Those who analyze don't accept ideas as they arrive. They take concepts apart, examine each piece, and only then decide how to rebuild them. That attitude turns learning into something living, dynamic, and personal. But be warned, analysis is demanding. It requires deeper and therefore slower thinking, and that's exactly why few remain at this level. Many confuse mental effort with error, when in truth, that discomfort is the sign that the brain is expanding. The more you compare, the more you understand. The more you take things apart, the more clarity you create. And over time, you begin to see patterns that were once invisible. That is the moment when thinking stops merely following knowledge and begins producing it. Start by comparing opposite ideas. Take two concepts and ask, in what ways are they similar? In what ways do they contradict each other? This simple exercise forces the brain to move beyond repetition and enter deep analysis. Build contrast tables. List differences, causes, and consequences between themes. It's not just about remembering, it's about seeing patterns. Create relational mind maps. Don't just connect words, connect logical relationships, cause, effect, hierarchy, dependency. See knowledge as a living organism. Ask second-level questions. Don't just ask, what is this? But rather, how is this related to that? Or, what changes if one element is altered? Comparative thinking is the training ground of the analytical mind. Accept slowness. Deep thinking is slower, but infinitely more powerful. Effort is the price of clarity and the proof that your brain is evolving. When the mind learns to analyze, it starts to think like a strategist. But something essential is still missing, the ability to judge what truly matters. Because seeing patterns is one thing, deciding which ones are relevant is another. And that's where the next level of thought is born, judgment. Pay attention now, because this is the point where thought stops being merely intelligent and becomes wise. The fifth level is the level of evaluation, of prioritization, of lucid judgment. Here you don't just understand the world, you decide what truly matters within it. So far, you've learned to remember, understand, apply, and analyze. But none of these abilities have real power unless you can choose. Knowing what to ignore is as important as knowing what to understand. A mind that cannot prioritize drowns in information. A mind that judges with clarity builds wisdom. This is the level where knowledge becomes criteria. You begin to see that not all ideas deserve the same weight. Not every argument is solid. Not every theory is applicable. Not every answer is true. The evaluating mind questions everything, even itself. At this stage, thinking becomes conscious and responsible. You stop following models and start creating your own parameters. You stop looking for answers and begin crafting better questions. But there's a challenge. Judging is not the same as criticizing. Judgment requires balance.
the courage to doubt without cynicism, and the humility to learn without submission. The mature mind doesn't seek to be right, it seeks to be clear, and clarity is the highest form of intellectual power. Evaluating is the art of giving weight to ideas. It's the moment when thought becomes a compass, and you, finally, stop being a student and become a decision maker. So to strengthen level 5, do this. Ask, why does this matter, all the time. When studying or reflecting, don't accept anything without purpose. If an idea doesn't change how you see, act, or think, maybe it doesn't deserve your time. Create value hierarchies. List what is essential, what is useful, and what is dispensable. This trains your mind to filter and prioritize. Debate with respect, but without submission. Listen to opposing opinions, but evaluate arguments, not voices. Thinking for yourself is the first act of intellectual freedom. Write critical syntheses. After reading something, note what you agree with, what you disagree with, and what you still don't understand. This simple habit turns reading into active thought. And finally, suspend quick judgment. Rushing to conclude is the enemy of clarity. Wait, observe, question. Discernment is born in the silence between stimulus and response. When you learn to judge with lucidity, you begin to see the world as a board of possibilities. But the evaluating mind doesn't create, it refines. And that's why the next level is the most creative of all. The level of synthesis, innovation, and creation. The mind that builds new ideas from what already exists. Now imagine the moment when thought stops following known paths and begins to carve new trails. This is the 6th level of the mind, creation, where knowledge turns into invention. Here the mind ceases to be just a tool for memory and becomes a source of originality. At the 5th level, you learn to judge what's worth your time. But at the 6th, you go further. You use everything you know to generate something that doesn't yet exist. It's the stage where thought becomes art. The creative mind combines old ideas into new forms, sees solutions where others see limits, and turns chaos into meaning. Creation isn't a gift. It's the natural result of a mind that has learned to think deeply. Those who understand, apply, analyze, and judge with clarity will, inevitably, create. Because creation is the reflection of a mind that has mastered the fundamentals and dares to go beyond them. But here's the secret. Creation doesn't come from overexertion. It comes from mental freedom. The best ideas appear when the brain is relaxed, curious, and playing with possibilities. Creativity is thought in its purest form of curiosity, the same state you had as a child. The creative mind doesn't fear mistakes. It understands that every mistake is just an attempt with another name. It doesn't seek perfection. It seeks discovery. That's why creation is one of the most human acts there is. It's the mind in dialogue with the unknown. So from today on, play with what you've learned. Take something you've mastered and change the rules. If you've learned a theory, test its opposite. If you've mastered a technique, invent a new way to apply it. To create is to play with knowledge. Ask questions that have no ready answers. The creative mind moves through curiosity, not certainty. Ask, what if? Why not? How could this work differently? Impossible questions open invisible doors. Mix different worlds. Great ideas are born when two fields collide. Take a concept from science and apply it to art. Take something from philosophy and link it to technology. Genius lives in the intersections. Write down everything that comes to mind. Ideas are fragile. Write down even the ones that seem absurd. Sometimes that's where innovation begins. Create to understand. Don't wait to master everything before you start producing. When you create, you understand your studies more deeply. The mind learns best in the act of expression. When the mind creates, it touches the edge of what it means to be human, the point where knowledge turns into meaning. But there's still one level higher, awareness of your own thinking. The moment when the mind not only thinks, but observes itself thinking. And that's where the 7th and final level begins. Now imagine your mind standing in front of a mirror. Not an ordinary mirror, but one that reflects thought itself. You're not just thinking, you're watching how you think.
This is the seventh and final level of the mind, reflection. At this level, learning stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you control consciously. It's the stage of cognitive self-awareness, when you understand your own mental process. You're no longer the student trapped in the maze, you're the architect observing it from above. At the sixth level, you create, but at the seventh, you refine the creator within. You begin to recognize the patterns behind your successes, the triggers behind your mistakes, the useless repetitions, and the moments when your thinking becomes lazy. Here, the mind becomes the tool, and you become the operator. Reflection is the point where wisdom surpasses knowledge, because knowing something means being able to explain it. But understanding how you learn, think, and decide, that gives you the power to transform everything. The reflective mind observes its own behavior. It asks itself, why did I understand this easily, but not that? What did I do differently when I truly learn something? What distracts me? What deepens me? These questions don't just correct mistakes, they help you design a new way of thinking. Those who master this level master their own growth, because power no longer lies in the content, but in the process. You no longer depend on external techniques, you become your own method. And here's the most beautiful part. The more you reflect, the more you realize that thought has no end. The mind that observes itself grows in spirals. Each turn brings new understanding. Each mistake reveals another layer of itself. So explain what you've learned out loud, not for others, but for yourself. If you can't explain it clearly, it's because you don't yet understand it. External clarity is born from inner clarity. Analyze your own learning process. After you've learned something, write down, how did I learn this? What worked? What held me back? This simple habit turns studying into continuous self-development. Accept mistakes as diagnosis, not defeat. When you fail, don't blame yourself. Observe it like a scientist studying a phenomenon. Every mistake contains a map of what you haven't yet understood. Create rituals of metaconsciousness. Take 10 minutes a day to think about your own thinking. Ask yourself, what is my mind doing right now? Is it creating or repeating? That small pause reorganizes the brain to operate at higher levels of awareness. Keep a curious gaze. A wise mind isn't the one that knows the most. It's the one that never stops asking questions. Curiosity is the fuel of reflection, the mirror that keeps the ego from becoming blindness. When you reach the seventh level, you realize that a genius isn't born ready. He is built, layer by layer, consciousness by consciousness. And at the end of this journey, you understand that mastering the mind isn't about memorizing the world, but about understanding your own process of understanding. Those who reach this level know that thinking is an art, and learning is the most beautiful act of becoming human. Now, for all of this to truly sink into your subconscious, write in the comments, I choose to think at higher levels. Doing that will anchor the idea in your mind and inspire others to do the same. And if you want to keep evolving with me, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because in the next videos, we'll go even deeper on this journey toward the total mastery of the mind. You're not here by accident. You're here because you truly want to think, and that is the first sign of a genius mind. You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about thinking, not in some abstract philosophical way, but in a practical sense. How do we actually know when we understand something? Because here's the strange thing. Most of us walk around believing we understand things that we don't really understand at all. Let me tell you what I mean. A few years ago, I was at a dinner party, and someone asked me to explain how a refrigerator works. Now, I'm a physicist. I should know this, right? So I started talking about thermodynamics, heat pumps, compression cycles, all the technical stuff. And then I stopped myself mid-sentence because I realized something uncomfortable. I was using words I knew, sure, but I wasn't actually explaining anything. I was just reciting. If that person had been a child or someone with no background in physics, they would have been completely lost. And that bothered me. It bothered me because I had confused knowing the name of something with knowing the thing itself. This happens all the time. We learn vocabulary. We learn formulas. We learn to recognize patterns. And we mistake all of that for understanding. But understanding is something different. Understanding is what's left when you take away all the fancy words. So I started doing something that changed the way I learn everything. I started pretending to teach. Now, I don't mean I stood in front of a classroom every time I wanted to learn something new. What I did was simpler than that. Whenever I came across an idea I wanted to really understand, I would find a blank piece of paper and I would write out an explanation as if I were teaching it to someone who knew nothing about the subject. Not another physicist, not a colleague. Someone who had never heard the word thermodynamics or momentum or entropy. A curious person with no technical background. Maybe a bright 12-year-old. And here's what happened. Every single time, without fail, I would get stuck. I'd be writing along feeling confident, and then I'd hit a spot where I'd write something like, and then the system reaches equilibrium because, and I'd stop. Because what? Why does it reach equilibrium? I thought I knew, but when I tried to explain it in plain words, I realized I didn't. I had a vague sense of it. I could use it in equations, but I couldn't explain it. That moment, that uncomfortable moment of getting stuck is the most important moment in learning, because that's the moment when you discover the difference between what you actually understand and what you only think you understand. Most people avoid this moment. When they hit that wall, they tell themselves, well, I understand it well enough, or I don't need to know it that deeply, and they move on. But that's exactly backward. That wall is where the real learning begins. What I do when I hit that wall is simple. I go back to the source. I open the textbook again. I reread the section I thought I understood, but now I'm reading it differently. I'm not reading to collect information. I'm reading to fill in the specific gap I just discovered. I'm reading with a question in mind, and that makes all the difference. You see, the first time you learn something, you're trying to absorb everything at once. It's overwhelming. But when you go back with a specific question, why does the system reach equilibrium? You're like a detective looking for one particular clue. You read past all the stuff you already understand, and suddenly you see the sentence or paragraph that answers your question. It jumps out at you. And now you really get it because you needed it. Then I go back to my blank piece of paper and try again. And I get a little further until I hit another wall. And then I go back to the source again. And I do this over and over until I can explain the whole thing, start to finish, in simple language that anyone could follow. Now you might think this sounds tedious, and sometimes it is. But here's what I've found. It's actually faster than the way most people study. Because most people read through their textbooks or their notes multiple times, highlighting things, making flashcards, trying to memorize. They spend hours and hours, and at the end of it, they still don't really understand. They've just become better at recognizing the material when they see it. But when you use this method, when you force yourself to explain it in your own words, you're doing something much more powerful. You're not memorizing someone else's explanation. You're building your own understanding from the ground up. And that kind of understanding sticks. You don't forget it the week after the exam. It becomes part of how you think. Let me give you an example that has nothing to do with physics because I think this applies to everything, not just science. Let's say you want to understand how democracy works. Not just the definition, you can look that up in 10 seconds, but really understand it. How do you do that? Well, you could read books about democracy, you could learn about the separation of powers, checks and balances, representative government, all of that, and you might feel like you understand it. But try this instead. Take out a blank piece of paper and explain to an imaginary person why democracy tends to work better than dictatorship, not using political buzzwords, not quoting the founding fathers. Just explain it in your own words, from first principles. You might start writing something like, democracy works because people vote for their leaders. Okay, but why is that better? Because then the leaders have to do what the people want. But do they? What stops them from ignoring what people want once they're elected? Well, they'll get voted out next time. But what if they change the rules so they can't be voted out? What stops them from doing that? See what's happening? You're finding the gaps. And those gaps are where the interesting questions live. Why do we need an independent judiciary? Why is freedom of the press important in a democracy? Why do we need peaceful transitions of power? These aren't just abstract ideas, they're solutions to specific problems that you discover when you try to build up the concept from scratch. And when you go back and read about democracy now, after you've struggled with these questions yourself, everything makes sense in a way it didn't before. You're not just memorizing facts about democracy. You understand why it's structured the way it is. This is what I mean by the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing itself. Knowing the name is easy. Knowing the thing requires work. But it's the kind of work that actually gets you somewhere. Now, there's another piece to this that I think is crucial. When you're explaining something in simple language, you can't hide behind jargon. Jargon is useful. Sometimes it's a shorthand that lets experts communicate efficiently. But it's also a trap, because it lets you fool yourself into thinking you understand something when you're just familiar with the words. I'll give you an example from my own field. In quantum mechanics, we talk about wave function collapse. Students learn this term. They use it in equations. They can pass exams on it. But ask them to explain what it actually means, what's really happening physically, and most of them can't, because they've learned to use the term without ever building a real mental model of what it represents. The same thing happens in every field. In medicine, doctors talk about idiopathic conditions. Do you know what idiopathic means? It means we don't know what causes it. But it sounds much more impressive than saying we don't know. In business, people talk about synergy and optimization and leveraging core competencies. What do those phrases actually mean? Often, nothing very specific. They're just comfortable words that let you avoid the hard work of precise thinking. When you force yourself to explain something without jargon, you can't do that. You have to actually understand what's going on. And if you can't explain it simply, that's a sign. It's a sign that you don't understand it as well as you think you do. Now, I should tell you, this is humbling. When I first started doing this seriously, I was shocked at how many things I thought I understood but actually didn't. I'm a physicist. I've won awards. I've taught at universities. And yet, when I sat down and tried to explain basic concepts in simple language, I found holes in my understanding all over the place. But that's good. That's the point. The goal isn't to feel smart. The goal is to actually be competent. And competence comes from being honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't. There's something else I've noticed about this way of learning. When you understand something deeply enough to explain it simply, you start to see connections you didn't see before. You start to notice that the same basic principles show up in different contexts. The way a refrigerator works isn't really all that different from how an air conditioner works or how a heat engine works. They're all just moving energy around using the same basic ideas. And once you really understand those basic ideas, you can figure out new situations without having to memorize every specific case. This is what people mean when they talk about first principles thinking, though I don't love that phrase because it sounds fancier than it is. It's just understand the basics really well and everything else gets easier. I used to have students come to me and say, "Professor Feynman, I've read this chapter 3 times and I still don't get it." And I would ask them, "Have you tried writing out your own explanation?" Usually they hadn't. They thought reading was learning. But reading is just the first step. Understanding comes from engaging with the material, wrestling with it, trying to reconstruct it in your own mind. Sometimes they'd say, "But I don't know enough to explain it yet." And I'd tell them, that's exactly why you should try to explain it. Because trying to explain it is how you find out what you don't know. You don't wait until you understand something to explain it. You explain it in order to understand it. It's like the old saying, you don't really know something until you can teach it. But I'd go further than that. You don't really know something until you can teach it to someone who doesn't already speak your language, who doesn't already share your assumptions. That's the test. And here's what I find beautiful about this. It works for everything, not just academic subjects. You can use this to understand how your car works, or how the economy works, or how your relationship with your spouse works. Anything that's worth understanding is worth trying to explain in simple terms. Let me tell you about one more thing I've noticed. When you explain things this way, you often end up with an explanation that's different from the textbook. Not wrong, just different. You come at it from a different angle, use different analogies, emphasize different aspects, and that's fine. In fact, that's better than fine, because that explanation is yours. You built it. You understand why every piece is there, because you put it there yourself. This is the opposite of what most education does. Most education tries to give you someone else's understanding, already packaged and complete. Read this. Memorize that. Here's how to think about it. But understanding doesn't transfer that way. You can't just download someone else's understanding into your brain. You have to build your own. Think about it this way. If I wanted to teach you how to cook, I could give you recipes. I could tell you exactly what ingredients to use, exactly what temperature, exactly how long to cook it. And if you followed my instructions precisely, you'd probably make something decent. But you wouldn't really know how to cook, because the first time something went wrong, you didn't have one of the ingredients, or your oven runs hot, or you wanted to make twice as much, you'd be lost. But if instead I taught you about how heat changes proteins, how salt enhances flavors, how fat carries aromatics, how acid balances richness, if I taught you the principles, then you could figure things out yourself. You could improvise. You could create. You wouldn't need my recipes anymore. That's what this method of learning does. It teaches you the principles. It forces you to understand how things actually work, not just what steps to follow. And here's the thing. This isn't just useful for learning subjects. It's useful for living, because life constantly throws situations at you that aren't in any textbook. New problems, unexpected challenges, things you've never seen before. And if you've spent your life memorizing other people's solutions, you're not prepared for that. But if you've spent your life understanding how to think things through from the ground up, if you've practiced breaking things down and building them back up in your own words, then you can handle novelty. You can figure things out. I think this is really what education should be about. Not filling people's heads with facts, not training them to pass tests, but teaching them how to think, how to question, how to understand, how to be honest with themselves about what they know and what they don't. And it starts with something as simple as a blank piece of paper and a willingness to admit that you might not understand something as well as you thought. That's all it takes. That willingness to be wrong, to be incomplete, to be still learning. Because here's the secret. We're all still learning. Every one of us. The smartest person in the world is still confused about most things. The difference is just that some of us admit it, and some of us pretend we're not. I spent my whole life being confused. Still am. But I've learned to be comfortable with that confusion because I know it's temporary. I know that if I sit down with a blank piece of paper and work through it step by step in simple language, eventually it'll make sense. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but eventually. That's the real lesson here, I think. Understanding isn't magic. It's not something you're born with or without. It's just work. Patient, humble, honest work. Trying to explain something, finding where you get stuck, going back, trying again, over and over until it clicks. And when it does click, when you finally really understand something, when you can explain it clearly and simply, when you can see all the way through it, that's one of the best feelings in the world. Not because it makes you special, but because it means you've done something real. You've added something to yourself. You've grown, and you can do that with anything, at any age. You never stop being able to learn. You just have to be willing to pick up that blank piece of paper and start writing.